This is the podcast overview for week 4. We will be covering chapter 3, social perception. So here is the to-do list for this week. And just again, you want to make sure that you're doing the things in the order that I put them. That makes the most sense for working through the material and having everything kind of flow in the order that we would normally be doing it in class if we were in person. So let's just go through what we have here. You're going to want to review the chapter objectives for chapter 3, which are here. And I've included a podcast overview where I talk about each of these. So that's really important to listen to that. Will help you definitely to know what to zero in on and what to focus on and use that for study purposes. You're going to want to read chapter 3 as well as read article 5, the warm-cold variable in first impressions. So in chapter 3, we're dealing with social perception. One piece of social perception is how we are perceived by others, and a big portion of that can be first impressions when we're first meeting people and they're developing their ideas about us and making judgments and inferences off of our behavior. So the Carve Out article that I have for you this week deals with that exact thing. It's a study done by Harold Kelly about the types of descriptions we tend to pay more attention to in describing the characteristics of people. What kinds of things stick with us and what kinds of things don't. So you're going to want to read the chapter first and then read this article. In the chapter, it talks about first impressions. That will give you a good overview of understanding what goes into first impressions, and then you can dive a little deeper with this article in looking at a study, a very important study done in the field of first impressions. Once you've done those readings, then I would take a look at the lecture slides, and I would kind of match up the lecture slides with the readings, fill in any blanks, connect ideas between the two. I've posted some videos for you this week. These, of course, are in addition to any that are in Revel. So as you're reading through your e-text, there's points where there's videos. You want to be watching any videos that are embedded in the reading. And then these are just in addition to that. So because we're covering social perception, I've given you a video on body language. This is a really great video. It was done by the History Channel, and it really dissects nonverbal communication as a key element in how we talk with each other, how we understand power differentials between people, between leaders, the art of persuasion. It deals with just a lot of topics that the chapter covers. So this documentary is, I think, about 50 minutes long, but I think you're really going to like it because of how they do it. It's not a boring, dry video. It's really interesting. It's got Hollywood celebrities, and it picks apart people's behavior and dissects it, and then shows you the why behind it all, behind facial expressions and body language and posture and tone of voice, and why all of those things make such a big difference when it comes to how we communicate with one another, as well as what that communication leads to. So you're going to want to watch this body language video. And then I just have a few very short clips on some key concepts that the chapter covers, one of them being fundamental attribution error. So again, this is sort of when we place a lot of emphasis on what we see rather than what we don't see. So we tend to look at the external elements about a person's behavior, and we draw a lot of conclusions based on those external elements, and we don't give a lot of weight to things about the person. right? So we might be looking at, their behavior, and we might be saying, oh, they're so rude, or I can't believe they said that. We're just going off of the outward things people are doing, but we might not be paying attention to, like, well, why did they do that? Is that usual for them? Is that normal behavior for them? Did the situation warrant them to act that way? Would they act that way in other situations? So fundamental attribution error is something that's a very Western phenomenon. It tends to happen a lot more in Western cultures, where we place too much value on the internal aspects of a person, and we kind of disregard situational aspects that might be leading to behavior. So I've put a couple of different, just short clips explaining fundamental attribution error. And the reason I put a couple different clips is because I loved both and I couldn't decide, and they each have some really great examples. So if any of you struggled with the last test, one thing I've been telling students who I've met with so far is that social psychology is an applied psychology. And what that means is that there's a lot of elements and concepts that are only best understood when you understand how they would be happening in the real world, right? So what would fundamental attribution error look like if someone was doing it out in the real world? What might be an example of that? How would we see that in a different setting, right? So it's one thing to understand the definition of fundamental attribution error. You need to know that, but even better to understand how it operates and be able to come up with an example of it. So I love these two videos because they had a couple different examples of what that looks like in the real world. And that's my challenge to you going forward with taking in these concepts, is to always be thinking about what would be an example of this concept. Every time you encounter a new concept in the reading, it always gives you examples in the textbook. Can you come up with any of your own that you might think apply to? That's a way to challenge your brain about thinking about the concepts in a different way. Here's a video by Khan Academy on impression management, all the different elements that go into how we manage the impression we make on other people, because we kind of do that. Sometimes we are more apt to do that. We have more motivation or reason to do that. Like if we're in a job interview, we obviously are giving it our best. It's our best impression of who we are. That's probably not who we are on a day-to-day basis, maybe. Maybe some of it, but some of it isn't. It's our best foot forward. So this is a great video talking about all the different elements that go into the impressions we make on other people, and some research behind that. All right, once you've done the readings, you've looked over the lecture slides, and you've watched the videos, you're then ready to go ahead and contribute to the discussion board postings. I really want you guys taking the week to take in the material. Don't jump to getting these posts out right away, like Tuesday, Wednesday, because what that does is that tells me you've not really had a lot of time with the material and you're already jumping into trying to explain it, right? Unless you're working, all day, Monday and Tuesday, on just this class, which is highly unlikely, chances are 2 to 3 days is not enough with the material. If I were covering this with you in person, we'd usually spend a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, if not maybe even a little bit more, just talking about the material and going over the chapter before you had any homework on it due. So you can consider your discussion posts homework, okay? And you don't want to start those until you really have a good grounding and understanding of the readings. So I give you until Friday to do those original posts. You don't want to be responding to anyone else until after Friday. Everyone needs a chance to respond with their original post. And the reason I do that is because everyone needs a chance for others to comment on their posts. And if you're jumping right in and responding to the first few people who post, then it kind of cheats out the later people who post later, and they don't end up getting anybody commenting on their posts. So to make it fair and equal all around, that's why I've instituted these different deadlines, right? So you have a Friday deadline for your original post, and you have a Sunday deadline for your replies to others. And you can be crafting your post as you go through the reading. So I would encourage you to look ahead and look at what the question is for discussion, so that way it's on your radar, and as you're reading through the chapter, and you come across, it's about first impressions. Let me take some extra notes here. You can kind of be crafting your response as you go through the readings, if that makes sense. So this week's discussion revolves around first impressions. You want to be pulling not just from the article reading, but also from the textbook. There's a ton of stuff about first impressions. It's an entire segment in the chapter. And you want to be thinking about how long-lasting are first impressions? What does the research say? How long do first impressions last? Are they important? Do we get over them pretty quick? If you make a bad first impression, do you have a chance to redo that, or are you stuck forever? What does that look like? And so then you're going to support your answer. And I want you to think about, would your first impressions persist over the course of a semester or even longer? So your first impression of another student or a professor or whatever, would they last that long? How could you test this? If you were to set up a little study, let's recall back to Chapter 1, Research Methods, how would you design a research study to answer that question? Would you want to do a survey? Would you want to explain causality, what causes first impressions? Be sure to pick the right type of study design. So again, you might have to go back and look at those, experimental versus correlational and all that good stuff. And then tell me how you would set up your methodology to measure the effect of first impressions. So this is, a multifaceted question. It should take you a little bit of time to dive into this and explain this. It's going to require not just material from this week, but material from Chapter 1. This is good practice in understanding research design as we're going through and we're taking in new studies. So all semester long, you're going to be reading about original research studies done in social psychology, the kinds of questions they answered and how they did it. This is great practice for being able to academically think about a research question and how you would even go about answering it. So that's your discussion post for this week. I've also included the cite as you write instructions. Remember, you should be citing correctly as you're supporting your statements via the use of the readings and the chapter and the article. You want to cite properly in APA format. Okay, so we're doing author last names and dates. We're not doing direct quotes. Remember, we want to paraphrase and cite the author and the date. We don't want to be using direct quotes. It's kind of like a no-no in social science research writing. So just keep that in mind, okay? And if you have any questions about what that's supposed to look like, you can consult this reference document here. And then I just want to remind everybody that I do have Zoom office hours. So if you'd like to meet with me to talk about anything, please feel free to email me and we can set up a Zoom. I've already met with several people from the class to do that on various topics and things and questions. So please just keep that in mind as you're taking in the material and you're processing. And don't forget to look over the objectives and listen to the podcast that I've done there for that. Thanks, everyone.